Loneliness. One of the many universal experiences for mankind, and also the emotional heart for so many fantastic stories. At one point or another, everyone has felt that sense of loneliness or isolation, and when we see that trait in another person or within a character, it creates a sense of connection with them by which we can explore the stories and ourselves. But why does this matter, and what are some of what I consider to be the best explorations of that idea? My name is Josh, I'm the host of Beyond Media, and in this video we'll be taking a look at the devastating truth of loneliness in anime. What I find so interesting about this theme, this character trait, is how grounding it can be within a story. When you think of a bizarre world like Berserk's, where the horrors on the cusp of comprehension lie and where dramatic and otherworldly events are commonplace, it almost feels like we shouldn't be able to exist in this story as well as we can. Take a look at some of these monsters, these insane panels for which none of us have ever seen in the flesh with our own two eyes. We cannot relate to these monsters, and none of us have taken up the sword to slay an impossible beast. But when you look at this panel, I think that it's impossible not to feel some familiarity. What is that expression on his face? Why does the way he stands look like something I have felt before in the past? Take a look at some of these other panels where Guts is fighting, or when he's lying in the rain, or when he's walking alone in the cold with this tempered intensity in his eyes. There's a sense of loneliness and struggle there, and because of that bleeding emotional heart, the story is able to transcend the confines of fantasy and feel real and tangible. I had said that you and I have never fought these monsters, but is that really true? When our hearts are linked to that emotional sense of loneliness, we can almost start to feel a kinship for the character that is enduring that pain. Sure, maybe we've never taken up the sword and killed a beast like that before, but you have fought a monster. Maybe you fought it in your home, or in your mind, or deep within your own heart. So when you see a panel like this and understand and are connected to the story, even if the otherworldly elements are something you literally cannot relate to, it feels intimate and familiar. Just like sadness, anger, fear, and heartache, loneliness is an emotion. It's a concept and idea that we are able to identify ourselves in. And one of those characters that do it best is the protagonist of Chainsaw Man, Denji himself. Denji is a strange character. He initially doesn't exhibit a lot of the characteristics that we might associate with a person who is lonely, but invariably does struggle with that sadness. His constant desire to be loved and connected with other people is what is at the core of his character. When we meet Denji, he is only 16, but he has been living what has been a brutal life, growing up under his father, and the weight of that man's death and what it forced him into fundamentally has destroyed and changed who he's become and the capacity by which he's been lonely. There is a lot of story in what isn't seen in Denji's early life. When you see scenes of him as a young child, you're almost forced to wonder how many days he existed like that as a little boy. Even as he grows and does have Pochita, the effects of that untold story haunt him, as what he lacked as a child seeps its way into his relationships in the present day. For those few brief times we get to see Denji become introspective and try to work through his internal struggles, it lets us in on what so many people see in themselves. Denji has been alone for so long that even when he's in a situation where that need for connection could potentially be filled, he isn't able to grapple with it. It remains just outside the bounds of what he is able to achieve. If you spent any significant time being alone, it's very likely that you relate to sentiment, and unfortunately that is a part of the truth that loneliness brings, the very real, very present damage that it can cause us. But being alone doesn't constitute being lonely. You don't need to feel lonely while you're alone, and being surrounded by people doesn't prevent that emotion from rearing its ugly head. And so the question is, what does that look like? I want you to picture a character, one that is surrounded by people, maybe even looked up to and respected. Could a character like that accurately depict the idea of loneliness enough that we would be able to call it one of the hearts of that character, by which we are able to bridge the fantastic settings of anime with the real world emotions that we all experience? Of course, the answer is yes, and that character's name is Gojo Satoru. Now, Jujutsu Kaisen is infamous for its handling of the themes of loneliness. It's one of the through lines that stitches together characters to create the dynamics that we experience in the story, and that connection pierces through Gojo and ties him together with Geto, who is another fantastic exploration of this idea. And the secret to these two and their depictions are both perfectly illustrated through their cursed techniques. Whereas Denji was a character who expressed and explored loneliness through the idea of being alone and how that damages you going forward, Gojo is about emotional isolation. As the pinnacle of Jujutsu society, he has existed as the literal barrier between safety and implosion, bearing the title of the strongest. His curse technique, Infinity, is able to slow things down on a molecular level, creating a shield around himself that nothing is able to bypass. Symbolically, this is a way for Gege to communicate Gojo's lack of emotional intimacy as well. He isn't allowed to break in any way, and there is nobody who is able to understand him and bear this burden with him. When you think about Gojo's goal in the series, it can seem a bit basic. Quote, "I have a dream. I'll hit a reset on the mistake that this world of sorcery is. It's easy to slaughter the guys at the top, but they would just be replaced and nothing would change. Anyone who could simply kill the higher-ups wouldn't gain followers. That's why I chose education, to raise strong and clever comrades." It's tough to see, but Gojo's dream is a world where he isn't alone. Upon his ascension as the strongest after his first encounter with Toji, Gojo is revered as the king of the Jujutsu world. Throughout heaven and earth, he alone is the honored one, and because of that, throughout heaven and earth, he is alone. Although treated as a god among mortals and called upon as the savior of the world, within Gojo there is a heavy curse of loneliness. And this dream of his and that curse is made stronger when we consider that there was once a person who shouldered this burden with him. Suguru Geto is a character that also explores a great deal about loneliness. This is naturally in the spotlight after the death of Riko during the Hidden Inventory arc, but it runs a little bit deeper than just Gojo leaving him behind. In chapter 76, everything is laid out for us perfectly in his monologue. Quote, "Satoru became the strongest. He can handle missions all on his own now. Shoko never went on dangerous missions to begin with, so by default I've been going on more missions alone as well. It was a busy summer. Curses spawned out everywhere like maggots, an endless cycle of exorcism and consumption. Exercise, consume. It's a taste that nobody knows. The taste of a curse, like ingesting a rag used to wipe up vomit." When you think about his ability to consume and use cursed spirits, it may not seem to have any tie to isolation and his descent into evil, but really it has everything to do with it. Think about what exactly a curse is, what exactly he is consuming. Curses are born of the negative emotions of humanity, a byproduct of their sins and hatred, and so the character of Suguru Geto likening the taste of it to a rag covered in vomit is more accurate than anyone can understand. Suguru Geto repeatedly needs to consume and understand the most evil parts of humanity to protect people from the very curses that they create. Ultimately, seeing this in action with his future daughters, where innocent sorcerers bear the burden of those who make curses, is what ultimately pushes him over the edge. But the key phrase in his monologue is, quote, "It's a taste that nobody knows." Because after Gojo ascends, no one can bear his burden, and no one has ever been able to bear the knowledge that Geto has. Both of these characters are completely isolated from the world around them in the deepest way possible. After Gojo ascends, he physically becomes unparalleled, and Geto becomes fully aware of the truth that is incomprehensible to anyone else. Both characters leave this arc bearing the curse of loneliness, and what's even more tragic about that idea is that it's not expressly a negative thing within the world of Jujutsu society, but instead it's often praised. Loneliness and individuality is an ideal within this world. It's something that is praised and needs to be taught to characters like Jogo, Megumi, and Yuta. You should have burned it all down. Jujutsu is an individual sport, and love is the most twisted curse of all. And with these ideals and ideas I brought to the forefront, we get characters like Gojo and Geto who, because of their role within the world they inhabit, become isolated in a way that nobody else could ever hope to understand. It's these themes and ideas that are what ground these two characters. It's how the god king that is Gojo can simultaneously be worshipped and related to at the same time. This is another truth about loneliness that is birthed out of something more than just being alone. You have never held the world together under the relentless attacks of chaos and disorder, but you have held up your own world. You have been saddled with the burden of responsibility or leadership or greatness or whatever expectations you were given or chose to live under. Like Geto, you may believe nobody would ever understand your situation, so you give up on it. Or like Gojo, you may have a dream and desire to have equals who you can stand shoulder to shoulder with. So far, we've explored portrayals of loneliness both from being alone and being surrounded by other people because of the isolation we can so often experience. But as I was thinking on this video and exploring the topic in research, I started to wonder if that was really all of it. What else is lurking just beneath the surface waiting to be uncovered and understood? And then I remembered what I believe to be far and away the best and whole explorations of this idea, how it united everything we talked about thus far and the harshest truth that we've talked about up until this point. But before we get there, I'd like to take a step back from the discussion so far. As I was thinking about these characters and picking through them, I started to wonder if I was missing something. At the centers of these scenes and characters may be loneliness, sure, but what was at the center of that? These emotions exist as part of us for a reason. They are a reaction to something that us or those around us have failed to reconcile. So I continue to work through characters that bled this same essence. What about loneliness and all of its brutality? Were these characters able to unite and forge into an emotion? And the character I settled on to explore for that topic is Kageyama Shigeo from Mob Psycho 100. Kageyama, otherwise known as Mob, is a character who exhibits a lot of the same traits that Denji and Gojo express in their version of loneliness. Within his verse, Mob is the strongest psychic we see in the show, but like Denji, fundamentally lacks a lot of the emotional intelligence and skills that construct what we would perceive as a normal human being. He's not popular at school, he's easily manipulated and isn't fully able to express himself and what he wants out of any given situation. The entire series communicating this expresses that lack of control over the side of himself that he's tried to lock away. In Season 1, Mob and his brother Ritsu are pushed into a conflict. Mob's brother is everything that Mob isn't. He's popular at school, gets fantastic grades, and is effortlessly loved by other people. Ritsu also doesn't have any powers, with both brothers eagerly seeking what the other has. Due to a traumatic event in their childhood where Mob lost control of his psychic powers, both brothers locked away a part of themselves. Mob started to resent and become distrustful of his powers and himself, whereas Ritsu walked on eggshells to be a model brother that would be there in case anything was weighing on Mob. However, when Ritsu is able to tap into his latent psychic ability, he goes on a power trip, eventually being found by Mob in an alleyway over a collection of defeated enemies. Mob is in disbelief as this goes against his entire philosophy on not using powers to harm. The two begin to exchange some dialogue as Ritsu begins to unveil the truth about him and the nature of their relationship. Quote, "Listen to me, Shigeo. Yes, I've always wanted to have superpowers, and I've always wanted to be like you. But that wasn't what I was truly feeling. I couldn't bear the inferiority and fear I felt toward you. So I protected myself by becoming convinced it was admiration. I was scared of you. I didn't know what you would do with your powers if the stress built up in you. I couldn't get into normal sibling quarrel with you because I had no means of defending myself against your powers. So I did what I could do to keep you from building stress as much as possible, and that fearful past is humiliating me now. As of now, I've lost interest in you. The buddy thing, the brother thing, ends today, Shigeo." Now, these two are able to move past this and together reforge their bond as brothers, but this exchange, I think, is able to explore the ideas of loneliness and isolation in a brilliant way. What these examples we've talked about use to fuel this idea of loneliness is this other idea of being misunderstood. Denji is misunderstood by others, sure, but also himself, and nobody knows what cursed spirits taste like. Society can't comprehend what it means to be Gojo Satoru, and this lack of understanding between these two brothers is what caused that silent chasm to split open. I think most of the time when we feel lonely, feeling misunderstood plays a massively large part within that. Whether it's a lack of actual people you are close to or you feel lonely amidst a group, there is some silent, uncommunicated longing. And this idea is revisited in the climax of the series in Season 3. After being dealt a great deal of physical trauma to the head on the way to confess to his crush, Mob's other half takes control. This is the manifestation of his powers, all of the parts of himself that he locked away and suppressed finally vying for control over their life. Mob becomes a devastating force of nature, destroying everything in his path. His character has been one that believed in using his psychic powers not to harm people, that if he had to use them and if he were stuck with them, he would only use them to help. And that philosophy, that side of himself, had garnered some truly meaningful and lasting friendships. By trying his best to adhere to that belief that everyone is equally as important and powers shouldn't be used to hurt, so many people have been able to lead happier, fuller lives. But as those very characters extend a hand to this side of Mob, he obliterates them. No one on this earth is able to contest with him. They try to call out to him, desperate to reach their friend, but Mob is completely closed off because this is a version of Mob that really they don't know. Now, Mob's brother has seen this side of him before. It was the same traumatic event that affected both of them all those years ago, but it has never been accepted or understood, and although Ritsu is able to access his own 100%, ultimately even he falls short of stopping his brother. As Mob draws closer to his crush, he has a conversation with himself, exploring exactly how the true him is unknown by everyone else. Quote, "Hiding your own true nature, your underside, your other half, is that peace of mind? No, it's a lie. By lying to yourself, you simply forgot for a long time. You joined a club and try to change yourself, but that's impossible. You are simply trying to make a new self. You thought you could avoid the most difficult problem by exerting yourself, and you were never looking at me. But this form is the real me. No one will ever come near me. No one will save me. I don't want that. The truth is, I don't trust anyone. The me who runs wild like this is the true me. You still don't want to acknowledge that? Accept it. This is me. No one will save me. If that's how it is, so be it. It's me, after all. Goodbye, Mob. And sadly, this is another thing that Mob Psycho 100 really hammers home here. We've spent 100 chapters of this story, 3 full seasons with this character, and yet both to us and the people around him, there's a part of himself that has been completely unknown and isolated from everyone else. All of the friends that Mob made and the care that they tried to give him doesn't matter because they don't know Kageyama Shigeo. They know Mob. Everybody is a little like Mob. There are parts of ourselves that we all hide, struggles that we never speak of that can breed these feelings of being misunderstood and lonely. The character of Kageyama's other half expresses this directly. He has always been alone. No one has ever come to save him. And I think that for all of us, that is the core feeling that we are feeling when we are lonely. Because it isn't just that we're alone, but we have no support in the presence of something that hurts us. When we are misunderstood, we feel truly alone. When you look at Suguru Geto during his descent, I couldn't help but think, how could they not notice? I mean, just look at the guy. In truth though, how could anyone notice and see something they weren't even aware of? Nobody else knows what cursed spirits taste like. Denji doesn't know what love really means, and no one has accepted this side of Mob. And I think that the fact that in this state no one was able to save Mob is the takeaway. When people don't understand, when you are not understood, no one can help you. You will forever be lonely. That is the devastating reality of loneliness in anime. But then, there's Reigen. Reigen is an interesting character, a fraud, a scam artist, but somehow arguably the most important character in the series. Claiming to be the greatest psychic in order to run his exorcism business, but actually having no powers, Reigen received a gift when Mob approached looking for him for advice, and the two started a business relationship where Reigen would pay him horribly and offer life advice while Mob would do all the heavy lifting in the business. However, once Mob stops working at the exorcism job, Reigen's facade that he doesn't need Mob slowly starts to slip away. Episode 6 of Season 2 details this fall into desperation as the layers of his character are peeled back. So far, Reigen was an accessory to Mob's story. He was a fraudulent but lovable mentor character who, for all his flaws, had a tremendously positive impact on Mob's life. The only incoming mail being a message from his mother to potentially get another job and stop wasting his life trying to build a business. Reigen can first seem like the opposite of Mob. Where Mob is naive, earnest, and introverted, Reigen is witty, deceitful, and eccentric, but in reality the two share a lot more similarities than we'd ever notice on a first watch. As Reigen tries to find some solace on his birthday, he goes to a bar where he's made friends with other witty salesmen and women who, upon finding out it's his birthday, don't celebrate but try to use it as a way to sell their products. At 27 years old, Reigen stumbles onto an alleyway and, despite not having a drop of alcohol, starts to panic and vomit due to the pressure and dread of his life seemingly coming to nothing. This is the part of himself that he hides from himself and the other characters in the cast. He's a repeatedly failed businessman, a fraud exorcist with no friends at 27 years old who relies on a superpowered middle schooler for his livelihood and parades around as a spiritual expert giving out life advice when his own life is falling apart. The circumstances of his character can remain as surface level as a comedy bit of the superpowered student learning under a clueless mentor, but Mob Psycho 100 takes the time to peel back what exactly those circumstances are creating and are built from. And critically, that secret of him being a fraud isn't directly exposed to the other characters in the series. That whole side of himself remains hidden and tucked away until the final act of the series, where we can fold Reigen back into Mob's story. Everyone else was unable to reach Mob on his rampage. Nobody was able to understand him and save him because Mob himself was unable to. None of those other characters had concealed and hid themselves the way Mob had up until that point. That was the lonely burden that he carried and that aided him across the course of the entire narrative. As Reigen fights tooth and nail to reach Mob, he's eventually able to make it with the help of Dimple, and it's his words that are finally able to reach Kageyama Shigeo.
I have no powers of any kind! And I never did! It was all a lie. right from the start.
He then confesses to Mob that the whole time he had just been using him for his psychic powers to run his business, and after everything is on the table, Reigen says the exact words that Mob needed to hear.
これが俺の正体だ。
This is a big gesture, but because Reigen was able to accept this nasty part of himself, it allows him to tell Mob that he can accept who he is too, and he doesn't need to conceal his powers or hate that aspect of himself any longer. And even though Mob's confession to his crush ends in rejection, infinitely more important, Mob accepts himself and his emotions, freely crying and not restricting the pain that fuels his power. What I think is so great about this depiction of loneliness from both of them is it's a very subtle, often unsung kind. Mob had a brother, a few friends, and was in the greatest club of all time, but because he had closed off, hated, and rejected an entire side of himself, it became impossible to form a true connection with the real him, and so much of him was completely alone. The same goes for Reigen, who had constructed this view of himself fully aware of what he was, yet unaccepting of letting others develop any meaningful connections because of that fact. And what I find most fantastic about the story is that it ends with a birthday party for Reigen. The real Mob, the real Reigen, celebrating with those who saw each other for what they had felt no one could, and still were accepted for themselves and others. All those devastating truths I talked about for how anime conveys loneliness, I think that they are all still true. Loneliness does leave a lasting impact. It can unfortunately curse so many, and it does make you feel like nobody could ever understand. It is true that sometimes you are Mob, but it could also be true that you could be Reigen. Sometimes all it takes is a moment of honesty with another person for all those horrible feelings to temper themselves and leave, even if it's only for a little bit. If there's anything to take away from this video, if you've made it this far, it's that everybody is looking for something or someone to help them feel understood, and that loneliness can feel a bit less heavy. And I think that's why these characters and these elements can so truly resonate with us watchers and readers. And today, if you're Mob, try to be Reigen. And until next time, keep dreaming.